You know, in Avery, who's our star for the night. Avery Singer is a New York-based artist. She is an artist who's represented in ICA Miami's collection and many collections around the world. At her young age, and she is a young artist because she's 1 year younger than myself, she has done extraordinary things, including major shows at the Polish Kunstverein, Kunsthalle Zurich, Secession, the Hammer Museum. ICA Miami is her largest institutional debut to date in the United States. And with this exhibition, she has, as I said, bowled us over by producing an entirely new, not just body of work, but way of working. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. I think that's a good place to leave it. So the most important thing is a round of applause for being some great examples. So Avery, just to introduce the exhibition, one of the things that I think is so exciting about this exhibition is how autobiographical it is, how personal it is. With Community Bachelor, you've really taken the opportunity to tell, through abstraction, the story of yourself and your childhood. Many of us here know, and it's said, been based in your entire life. Tell us a little bit about how New York has influenced this exhibition and the way you've been working.
Sure. Hey everyone. It's a good question because even my previous body of work I view as very autobiographical, but it takes more of the lens of kind of like a satire of the art world and socializing within the art world. So I kind of wanted to take this exhibition as an opportunity to sort of like go back in time in my life to a period before I was an artist. So I would say I became an artist when I was 15. So I tried to go like kind of before then. And I've found that with my latest body of work, there is so much detail in the animation software that I'm using that I have to kind of come up with more precise narratives to kind of give it meaning. So I grounded it in something a bit more distinct for the show.
And to make that, I think, visual and palpable for everybody, when you enter the show, in about an hour's time, you'll be greeted by, at the perimeter and facing you, elongated columns, which are meant to reference the architecture of the former World Trade Center building. This is a building that you had a relationship with over time. You're not that office there. I'm actually going to let you tell the story because you tell it better, but perhaps you could tell us why that building, aside from the fact that it was a turning point for so many of us, was important to present in this exhibition.
Yeah, sure. So initially because I work in, all my drawings are digital, so kind of like the beginning of an artistic thought for me starts on a computer. And initially I had wanted to make a model of this office that I kind of called the memory from the viewpoint of being a child. So I was about the height of the desk that my mom worked at. And so I wanted to recreate this office environment in software, and then I was trying to research it, find photographs of it, and there weren't any. So I thought, like, why don't I just sort of weave my memory into a fictitious narrative that I'm creating for the exhibition? And I thought it might be more interesting for me to kind of relate it to the audience in an installation rather than in a painting, because the paintings become heavily abstracted through all the processes that I'm using. So, yeah.
Now, I think while we're on the topic of your parents who are here and so fabulous, they're artists and projectionists as well. And both projection as a way of seeing things, as in cinema, as an experience are foundational to the work. Sort of a big thing to say, but maybe we could just talk directly about how projection itself has influenced the way that you work today.
Sure. So when you walk into the exhibition, the first thing you encounter actually is a corporate carpet, and you're walking on it, you kind of turn, and you're greeted with architecture that I've built in the gallery. And there's a urinal that's been cut into it, and there's a lens. So if you step up to the lens and you look through the lens, you actually see the entire space of the exhibition has been flattened. And so for me, I've actually made a painting about this experience. It's called Director. It's not included in the show, but for me, it was like a kind of analogous to the flattening that happens like when I make a painting. So, but it's like you're experiencing it through this lens. And then also the portraiture for me is, I think, heavily inspired by the film The Passion of Joan of Arc, and how Theodore Dreyer really, the strength of the film is the actor's ability to utilize their face as a means to convey emotion, narrative. His use of lighting kind of really endows viewers with either like a sympathy or like an anchor, depending on who you're looking at, like whether it's Joan of Arc or interrogators, whatever. And so I was thinking about that film a lot when I was creating the portraits of like Unity and Priya. And yeah, I mean, there's always some film references going on in the back of my head because I've seen a lot of movies over the course of my life.
Maybe the movie is a good catchword. You were already mentioning you're starting to introduce more of the storyline, and we see unity here. So I was wondering if you could talk more about the story that unfolds over the course of the exhibition across all the new work that you've made as far as the installation.
Sure. So this portrait of unity is actually facing the installation, which has, you'll see it has some confetti in it, and the confetti is reflected in her eyes. Sorry, their eyes. It's hard to see on here, but you'll see it. There's confetti in line. But there are kind of like three characters in the show. So there's Unity, Priya, and there's an inebriated art student who kind of resembles me. And they're all kind of inspired by people from my life. I mean, Priya was like an active person that I knew, I know. Unity kind of came from my imagination. And the art student is me, is my younger self. But I was thinking, I'll just give the audience a really basic narrative. And so the narrative is that you meet these characters. Here's a love story with Unity and Priya. Priya is like a young urban finance professional. Unity is a love kid. And so there's a suggestion like maybe this office is like Priya's office. There's a link to the characters.
I think it won't necessarily be obvious to people that figures like Priya behind us are not based on real people. They're invented and have some biographical lenses to them. But could you talk us through how you generate an image like this, which appears both painterly and photographically and real and unreal sort of at the same time?
Yeah, so these paintings are made manually and digitally and robotically. I began to use black gesso a couple of years ago. So that's kind of the base for these. The color white as a ground is really fantastic for illuminating color and really making it vibrant. So I wanted to challenge myself by making it black and seeing how digital color would translate and what would it translate. The character herself, I work with an animator. And I'll kind of source maybe a file like a already existing person, maybe in detail, like in Unity, the mustache is its own model. So I purchase a mustache. I purchase a head. I purchase hair. And then the animator and I really kind of get into like applications like ZBrush, where you're just sculpting all of the details on the face, from like every single hair in the nose to every pore on the head. I work with them on the lighting, if there are any props. And then eventually we sort of zoom around the model and I export stills. So actually this painting, I wanted it to have like a kind of urban or gritty feel to it. So I tagged it with the graffiti pen. And the background is really basic. It's just 2 spray bottles. And I spray the shit out of it with like white paint and water, and it drips and it looks messy and grimy. And I utilize liquid rubber, sprayed, splashed, and wiped on with a dish sponge because I hate paintbrushes. I'd rather apply it with a sponge. And so I kind of like work up this background, and then I use a commercial robotic airbrush printer, and I print the layers of CGI imagery.
One of the things that you said you were doing a walkthrough 2 days ago, and it's fast become one of my favorite things that you said about your work, is that you have 2 phobias, one of which is a paintbrush and the other which is walls, both of which are essential to painting typically. Now, those 2 phobias, as it were, manifest in different ways, but I suppose the precise place to start is with your use of airbrush. And I know also, just knowing that you didn't necessarily set out to be a painter, so maybe you could introduce us, we could go on black and white, to that process of making this work and sort of how you came to it essentially.
Yeah, when I went to art school, I was really interested in conceptual art, sculpture, video art, performance-based art, because that was where the more interesting conversations were happening in my school. And the painting department seemed completely irrelevant to me. So I didn't study painting. And then when I graduated and I found myself, living in my studio, I had leftover materials and not a lot of money. So I had this airbrush that was hanging around from like one project that I did with it. I had cans of air. I didn't even have an air compressor. And I had Bristol smooth plate paper. So I started to just, what I thought was making works on paper about my sculpture ideas turned into me actually really liking them and like becoming interested in these works on paper. So that kind of transitioned into, I would just buy the cheapest materials around, like masonite, whatever I made, like cheap panels, work on those, and then I realized like, oh, I'm a painter now. So yeah, that's how that happened.
Well, speaking to the other phobia that Alex mentioned, which is walls, we can't see it here right now, but once you'll walk over, you'll see that the majority of the paintings are actually not mounted on walls, but on a pull system that we've used before. The Kunsthalle Zurich And I was wondering if you could talk more about it, because his paintings really start floating in space, and this beautiful axis where they start to relate to each other too. So how you came up with this pole system?
Sure. So my second solo show in my career was in 2014 at Kunsthalle Zurich, which was just like a really major thing out of nowhere. So the curator just never really checked in with me. I think she just sort of trusted me to make work for the show. And I got there, the paintings got there, and we were in this giant empty room, and I told her, like, I can't use these walls, you know, like, it's just not in me. And so I suggested, like, why don't we use, like, a hanging wire, you know, which is something you see in museums. She's like, no, that's really too flimsy, your work is not, it's gonna kind of sway. I was like, oh, good point, you know, not really part of it. It's not like kinetic painting. And so she suggested, like, why don't we use some kind of industrial material? So we thought of using these steel poles that they could source really quickly. So those came in, and I didn't know if I was gonna like it, but we started using it, and I realized, like, this is a really fantastic solution for me. I don't have to do anything to this material. I can pretty much find it anywhere. You know, any city I go to, I'm gonna be able to find it easily, you know, cut it down to the right size, use it. So, and then you get this reveal of the painting. So you get the back of the painting, sides and the front. And I had gotten from a criticism from a painter that what I was making was not painting, which I thought was fantastic. So I thought, well, like, let me show you that it is a painting. So I'm going to put it in the middle of the room. You're going to walk around it, see that there's a canvas, stretchers, and paint on gesso. And there's no way that you can, like, really refute it. It just doesn't appear to some people as a painting, I guess, conceptually. And also in the back of my mind, I had kind of this thing going on, like, you should never hide anything in your work. Like, you should just reveal it all at once. You should never put something in front of anything to cover it or hide anything. So yeah.
In tandem with this, for the first time in this installation, you've included an exhibition design component, which is kind of velveteen, kind of a lore,
Just
stage curtains, yes, which complement the whole system. They also seem inherently illusionistic or theatrical. So I was hoping you could just walk us through that decision making, and also maybe that kind of dichotomy of the stagecraft of the curtain and the transparency of the whole system you use.
Sure. So I was thinking, like, with this office, you know, should I make some kind of, like, curtain for the office? And I didn't actually remember curtains in the World Trade Center. It just, I mean, the thing about those windows is, like, Minoru Yamasaki, the architect, like, made these columns 18 inches apart so that you wouldn't experience vertigo if you looked out the window. It was, like, kind of thin enough that you could see out and see, you know, have a view, but you weren't afraid of falling, or you wouldn't have a fear of heights. So curtains, like, weren't exactly necessary. Anyways, I thought, like, why don't I involve some curtains in the installation, and then I'll kind of, like, spread them through the show. And I thought they would also help me kind of control lighting. And then they really didn't work in the installation. They looked terrible. So I started to we started to install them behind the paintings, and then also, like, the back of the curtain is revealed, so you're kind of facing the banality of the back of this theatrical material that's supposed to be impressive. And the same thing with this painting.
Now, one of the things that I love about your work, and I think probably so many people here respond to, is how deeply you wade into art history. And in this installation, there are a number of references, and I think actually in just my brief touring on the show so far, I find that visitors are already sort of pointing at things that they see as citations. But the most obvious one, say, it's not even that obvious, it's a diptych that's a reference to Marcel Duchamp's view descending the staircase. These are two side-by-side interpretations of this canonical painting, both in your distinct visual languages, which is really fascinating to see and to compare the similarities and differences. I suppose the most direct question to ask is, aside from the obvious, is centrality in our history. What drove you to be inspired by Duchamp and his painting in particular?
Sure. There are kind of like a few drives. So the first one really is like I've seen other artists repaint this painting. Most recently, Jana Euler. So I thought, maybe this is like an interesting touchstone to kind of like for me to visit, as these other artists have. But then I also began to think about, how we represent the concept of linear time in a painting. And because like subjectivity of like A, the painter, and B, the viewer lies so much in the ability to see like how they made the painting and in what order and, what's layered on top of what. Being able to see it from start to finish, like I take that away from you. So you're not going to know like what happened in what order. It's completely flat, highly constructed, but there's also gesture as like a foil to the construction. I try to do what I can to like wipe away that relationship of like, your subjectivity relating to mine. So I thought like removing that, your ability to sense my time with this would be a way of like reframing and reorienting around the concept of representing linear time in a painting, because the original is about photography and how photography radically changed the way we can view linear time through like Muybridge. So, having like a set of stills of a horse galloping in front of a black curtain, all of those get laid next to each other, and so that progression is equated like, I don't know what else to explain.
Duchamp famously, of course, installed a urinal in a gallery. You have a urinal, you have a toilet, you also have two trash cans installed amidst your paintings and a large-scale installation. There's a lot you can draw from that, not just art historical reference, but also registers of high and low, for lack of a better word, purity and trash, for another dichotomy. All of that is packed into a completely immersive installation, which is the first large-scale sculpture that you've created. And it's a remark as an aside that it's a very brave thing to create a monumental sculpture in your first large-scale US museum show, and you pulled it off brilliantly, so thank you. And but perhaps, and I think it'll draw a lot of us, because there's a lot of incredible detail in that work. You tell us a little bit about why sculpture as a form was important in its installation, and then really guide us through what we're going to see in a few minutes.
Sure. A really exciting aspect to being invited to do a show in a space that's almost 8,000 square feet and open, is you can do anything in it. So I wanted to take it as an opportunity to do something architectural. And then with that, I decided, okay, I'll do something that's sculptural, not just architecture, but also like engages with sculpture, which is a medium that I cherish, and I just sort of like left in art school. And I mean, also to speak to like the use of the toilet, like the toilet is sort of the ultimate metaphor for art, because like the process of shit and its actual formation and all of the filters that it has to pass through is like analogous to the way that we make art. So, I mean, this is sort of like me making a joke metaphor to you about art, but it's like, yeah, this is the background to my another interest I had in using the toilet. So it's like referencing like the actual production of art, but also like this Duchampian reference. And yet it also becomes like a viewing device. So, but yeah, you'll walk in and you'll see like, it's like, is it the back of the piece, is it the front, and like walk around and there's like another side to it, which is really how like everything is kind of laid out in the show.
And I think it's interesting because you mentioned in a previous conversation that you kind of almost feel like a producer or director because it's so intricate and there's so many details, but then you're also directing these figures that go into your painting, and there's the stage curtain, so, and yeah, your parents are projectionists, so I wondered if you could talk more about the movie or how the process of painting relates for you to a maybe cinematic approach.
Yeah, sorry. I think with the black and white paintings, like I felt a relationship to film because there's a film grain in the spray, which I think really drew me to it. Like I thought it was very beautiful. Like if you've spent time in a dark room and you've made your own photos and like you've sort of like watched the magic of like the grain of your photograph appear on paper, I kind of felt like I was having the same experience making the painting. And then as I got into this more kind of like technical and commercialized way of making a painting, I really became more of like a film director, but I'm doing it all digitally. And yeah, I don't really know what else to compare it to. It feels like a producer.
I want to give us all a chance to experience the exhibition in just a few minutes, so I'm going to have us conclude there, but a very well-deserved round of applause for Avery Singer. It's a fantastic exhibition, and the images are quite cool, but they really do not do it justice, so I'm eager for you to see the works in person. This exhibition was not just created by Avery and us. There were many of you who were deeply involved. So Mike, who is Avery's assistant, and the whole ICA staff, you've been incredible. Figured out new ways of making work, installing holes, curtains. Thanks for all that you do. Thanks to the Hauser and Work team as well. They're incredible. You guys are amazing. I want to open up for 2 questions. And then feel free to ask a few in person as well after the talk, but I want to get us over.
I guess this is my personal first time seeing your work in person. It will be in a few minutes at least. So on the sculpture point, I think I heard correctly that this is your first time including a sculpture in your installation or in your exhibit. Did you have any fear or reservation in taking that leap, like going to a new form that isn't typical to you, or were you just gung ho and knew that it had to be done? What was your mindset about that?
That's a great question. I was definitely both. Because I kind of, my sense, when I left art school was that, sculpture is not really my medium. Like I'm not incredibly talented in this medium. And, I cherished it, but I wasn't that good at it, or at least that was my thought. But then I suddenly had this huge desire to engage in it. So my attitude is always like, if there's if there's an idea for something and like a real passion and interest in it, just do it. And I mean, there's even a fear, you know, when I'm making a painting that it could be bad or it could not achieve what I'm looking to achieve. So the fear can be there, you know, no matter what. It's sort of a part of it. I think it's a part of being able to be critical of yourself, which is important. But it has to be balanced with an ability to just sort of go ahead, you know.